reason for that is that the apparent transmedium element. Objects reportedly moving in and out of water. That matters because a distant light in the sky can be explained in many ordinary ways. It might be a drone, it might be a plane, it might be a balloon, a reflection, it might be a camera issue. Again, the key behaviour is that phrase, orbs launching other orbs. The memo describes a repeating pattern in which an orange mother orb appeared to produce clusters of smaller red orbs. Those smaller objects reportedly displayed varied motion, including coordinated horizontal movement and apparent altitude changes. It also notes that at least one red orb was described as stationary above a ridgeline for hours, and that the phenomena were described as silent. Welcome back to Aliens Explored. I'm Stu Jackson, and today we're doing something a little bit different. There's no Neil this time, unfortunately. He isn't with me for this recording, but I will be getting Neil's response to all of this very soon, because I suspect he's going to have thoughts, strong thoughts, possibly with gestures, knowing Neil. But today I wanted to take you through what I think are the most interesting, most difficult to dismiss, and potentially most important items from the US government's PURSUE UAP releases. Now, PURSUE, in case you're unaware, stands for the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters. So far, there have been 3 tranches of release. The first on the 8th of May 2026, the second on the 22nd of May, and the third just recently on the 12th of June. Now, before we get carried away, let's be very clear about something. These files, unfortunately, do not prove aliens. They do not prove non-human intelligence. They do not prove extraterrestrial craft are buzzing military bases and ponds and submarines. What they are, officially, is unresolved. But that word matters. See, unresolved does not mean alien, but it also does not mean nonsense. So what we're looking at today are the cases that, in my view, are the hardest to dismiss casually. The ones where there is either official provenance, multiple witnesses, military sensor material, government follow-up, or a wider case package that makes the whole thing more interesting than just another blurry light in the sky. Now, if you're listening to this on audio, this episode will still, hopefully, make sense. I'll describe what we're talking about as clearly as I can. But if you want to actually see the videos and the document references as we go, head over to YouTube, find us at Aliens Explored Podcast, and the video version of this episode will be the best way to follow along visually. I'll put a link in the description below as well. So if you're new here, welcome. This is Aliens Explored. We're not here to believe everything that we see, and we're not here to sneer at everything either. We're here to look at the files, ask better questions, and see what survives contact with reality. If that sounds like your sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow the podcast, and share this episode with someone who still thinks UFOs are just drunk people looking at Venus. Right, let's get stuck in with Tranche 1. Now, the first PURSUE release is not, in my opinion, the strongest for raw video, but it is incredibly important because it introduces what may be the most significant domestic case family in the whole archive, the Western US event. Now, the first video I would highlight from Tranche 1 is DOW UAP PR049, Unresolved UAP Report, Department of the Army 2026. So that's DOW UAP PR049 for those of you following along at home. Now, this is not the strongest first tranche video because the public clip alone proves anything dramatic. It doesn't. But the reason why this one matters is because it sits inside the wider Western US case cluster. Now, that's an important distinction. The video on its own, especially a public UAP video, can be nearly useless. It can be a light, a blur, a sensor artifact, a bird, a drone, a balloon, a flare, or just a blob with no context. But a video that sits inside a wider official case package with linked witness accounts and later analytical follow-up, that becomes a whole lot more interesting. And that's what PR049 has going for it. The public version that we have is still technically incomplete. We don't have the raw sensor data, we don't have full telemetry, and we don't have the complete location geometry or the kind of underlying data that would let independent analysts really go to town on it. But what we do have is a video connected to one of the most compelling case families in the PURSUE archive. So the point is not look at this one video and believe. The point is to look at where this video sits. And where it sits is inside a cluster of reports involving Orbs, federal witnesses, and later AARO analysis. And that's what makes it worth serious attention. Now, the second video from Tranche 1 is DOW UAP PR036, Unresolved UAP Report, Middle East, May 2020. I'll repeat that number again. It's DOW UAP PR036. Now, this one is less dramatic, but in some ways it's more useful because the public description gives us timings. The object re-enters view at around 19 seconds. The sensor narrows field of view at around 1 minute 16 and again at around 1 minute 56. A blue reticle appears at around 2 minutes 10. Then the system changes mode and loses the object at around 2 minutes 15 to 2 minutes 17. Now that is useful because it gives us something to analyse. You can ask, does the target behave like a real object as the sensor changes field of view? Does it move independently? Does it scale properly? Does it look like something being tracked? Or does it behave more like a sensor artifact? And that's the kind of UFO footage that I actually prefer talking about. Not because it's the most sensational, but because it gives us something to test. Now, again, possible mundane explanations remain very much alive with this one. Distant aircraft, balloon, sensor issue, thermal reflection, imaging artifact, all those are still on the table. But this is an example of a public UAP clip where the discussion can move beyond that looks weird and into what is the sensor actually doing. And that is much more powerful. Now, let's move to the documents from Tranche 1. The first and most important is the Western US event file, listed in the assessment as Western_US_event_slides_5.026.2026.pdf. For listeners, the search term to remember is Western US event. Now, this is, I think, one of the essential documents in the whole archive. And why is that? Because it turns the Western US case from a rumour into an official case family. It summarises reports by 7 federal employees who described UAP-related phenomena over 2 days in 2023. And the categories described are not just light in the sky. We're talking about reports of orbs launching other orbs, a large stationary glowing orb at close range, a pursuit of a large phenomenon near the ground, and other related observations. Now, just to reiterate what I said earlier, that does not prove non-human intelligence, but it's not nothing. 7 federal employees, multiple observations, a structured official summary, a case that later receives further analytical treatment. That's the sort of thing that we should be asking about, not because we already know the answer, but because it is exactly the sort of case that deserves more data. And the phrase that jumps out, at least for me, is orbs launching other orbs. Because if that is accurate, if that was what was truly observed, then we're no longer just talking about a light drifting across the sky. We're talking about structured behaviour. So you're talking about repetition, you're talking about a parent object and smaller objects, and possible coordination. Now that could still be drones, it could still potentially be flares, it could still be a military test. It could be misperception under unusual conditions. But it's a harder thing to dismiss than a single witness saying, "I saw a strange light." The second Tranche 1 file I want to address is a US PER statement about UAP sighting. And that's the title I would use when searching for it. The USPA, or US PER statement about UAP sighting. Now this one's significant because it's an official interview product involving a senior US intelligence official and a first-hand UAP encounter. Now, witness status does not make a story true. Senior people can be mistaken. Intelligence officials can misinterpret things. Pilots can misread displays. Police officers can misjudge distance. Scientists can be fooled. Everyone can be fooled. But witness status does matter when we are assessing seriousness. This is not an anonymous internet post. It's not, "My mate Dave saw something behind Tesco." This is an official statement connected to a broader case family. So what makes it particularly interesting is that it seems to connect with later material, especially ODNI UAP D001, which we'll come to in Tranche 2. So Tranche 1 gives us the foundation. It gives us PR049, the Army-linked video sitting inside the Western US case cluster. It gives us PR036, the Middle East military sensor clip with useful public timing detail. It gives us the Western US event slide deck, which is the key document for the whole Western US case family, and it gives us the USPER statement about UAP sighting, a senior intelligence official witness statement that links into later material. So the story of Tranche 1 is not, "Here is the best alien video." The story is, here's the beginning of a case family that keeps coming back, and that to me is far more interesting. Now we move into Tranche 2. Now this is the tranche where the sensor data becomes much more interesting, but it's also where the caveats become much more important. Several of the second tranche video pages carry a warning that the materials were found on classified networks and that many lack a substantiated chain of custody. That is a really big deal. You see, chain of custody matters. If we do not know exactly where a video came from, how it was handled, whether it was edited, what system produced it, and what metadata sits behind it, then we have to be very, very careful. A clip can be fascinating and still not be conclusive. So with that warning in place, the strongest second tranche video, I think, is DOW UAP PR067. The full title is Multiple Spherical UAP USO Near Sub Call Sign Redacted 2022-0325 In and Out of Water. So that record number again, DOW UAP PR067. Now this is probably the most interesting public sensor clip in the PURSUE archive if your question is specifically about behaviour suggestive of something beyond ordinary aviation. Now why is that? The reason for that is that the apparent transmedium element. Objects reportedly moving in and out of water. That matters because a distant light in the sky can be explained in many ordinary ways. It might be a drone, it might be a plane, it might be a balloon, a reflection, might be a camera issue. But something apparently moving between air and water, especially near a submarine context, that's a more difficult claim. If real, it implies dynamics. It implies interaction with the medium. It implies a behaviour set that is harder to wave away. Now, and this is important, the public material does not settle that. We do not have the raw sensor stream. We do not have complete environmental data. We don't have the full platform context. We don't have target range. We don't have the kind of technical package that would let us say confidently, yes, these objects really entered and exited the water. So unfortunately, PR067 is not proof. But it is exactly the sort of release that makes you say, right, show us the rest. Show us the raw data. Show us the sensor metadata. Show us the environmental conditions. Show us whether the water surface reacts. Show us whether there's a thermal disturbance. Show us whether this is genuinely transmedium behaviour or whether it's an optical effect, a reflection, birds, spray or something else. And that's why PR067 is so compelling. Not because it answers the question, but because it sharpens the question. The second tranche 2 video that I want to look at is DOW UAP PR071. This is the Lake Huron F-16 shoot-down footage from the 12th of February 2023. That again, DOW UAP PR071. Now, we need to be careful with this one. It's not necessarily strong evidence of non-human intelligence. In fact, the public description may lean towards something, more balloon-like than something exotic. But it is very strong evidence of institutional seriousness. This was an object that became important enough to be engaged by a US military aircraft. The public footage reportedly shows the target before the strike, the kinetic interaction, and a fragmentation pattern afterwards. Now, if the object was just a balloon or a mundane airborne object, that still matters, because then the question becomes, how did it reach the level of military engagement? What was known at the time? What was not known? What did the sensor operators see? Why was that decision made? So PR071 is not in this list because I think it's the most alien looking video. It's here because it's one of the most consequential. A military engagement with an object categorized within this UAP release framework is not something we should just shrug off. Even if the answer turns out to be ordinary, the process that led to that answer, that's what matters. And this is where I want to pause and bring you into the show. From this episode onwards, I want to start building a regular listener questions section for Aliens Explored. So if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment under this episode and start it with either question for Stu or question for Neil, or question for both of us. Neil isn't with me today, but I'll be re-recording his response to this episode very, very soon, and I want to put some of your questions to him directly. Ask us about those files. Ask us what we think the best explanation is. Ask us what we think is being hidden or not hidden. Ask us what would actually convince us. Ask us what we think AARO, the Pentagon, the intelligence community, or the witnesses themselves should release next. Now, if you're listening on audio, come on over to YouTube anyway, search Aliens Explored Podcast. Find this episode and put your question in the comments there. That way we can pull it into a future episode and actually respond to it properly. You can, of course, always email us as well, aliensexplored@gmail.com. Right. Anyway, back on to Tranche 2. So the first of the documents that I want to look at from Tranche 2 is ODNI UAP D001. The title is USPER Narrative, Senior USIC Official. And that document again, ODNI UAP D001. Now this, for me, is one of the strongest witness-driven documents in the public archive. It describes a senior US intelligence officer involved in a helicopter search after earlier Orb reports. The narrative reportedly includes radar hits, FLIR use, a super hot object low to the ground, an object splitting into two, a close approach to the helicopter, swarming orange orbs, and orbs appearing above fighter jets and matching their flight path for short periods before dimming out. Now that is a lot, and it will be very easy to sensationalize it. But the more useful way to approach it is this. ODNI UAP D001 appears to be part of a broader cross-referenced case network. It links back to the sort of witness material we saw in Tranche 1 and forwards into the wider Western US case family. So once again, the power of the item is not just the story, it's the connections. A senior witness statement by itself is, for me, really interesting. A senior witness statement connected to related imagery, helicopter activity, radar claims, FLIR references, and other official documents is really interesting. It's still not proof, but it's definitely not nothing. And that phrase, not proof, but not nothing, may be the most honest summary of the entire PURSUE archive. The second Tranche 2 file that I want to look at is DOW UAP D017, UAP reported at Sandia Base 1948 to 1950. That's DOW UAP D017. Now this, as you can guess from the dates in the title, is a historical file. I think it's really important because it reminds us that the UAP problem did not begin with a tic-tac, FLIR clips, or congressional hearings. This file reportedly contains 116 pages of material relating to repeated reports of green orbs, discs, and fireballs around Sandia and New Mexico between 1948 and 1950. The assessment refers to around 209 reports in that period. Now, does a historical cluster from the late 1940s prove non-human intelligence? No, absolutely not. There are lots of possible explanations. Meteors, bolides, Cold War testing, observational bias, classified programs, public anxiety, and poor data collection, at least by modern standards. But recurrence, that's what matters. A single strange report is easy to dismiss. A dense cluster of reports near strategically sensitive infrastructure, that makes it a lot more interesting, especially when the file reflects institutional concern rather than just newspaper or media excitement. So DOW UAP D017 is not the most dramatic item in Tranche 2, but it is one of the most important because it shows pattern, recurrence, and government attention over time. And that's something UFO history is full of. Not one perfect smoking gun, but patterns that keep appearing around sensitive places. So, Tranche 2 gave us PR-067, the apparent transmedium submarine-related case. PR-071, the Lake Huron shootdown footage. ODNI UAP D001, the senior intelligence official narrative. And DOW UAP D017, the Sandia Base historical pattern file. Now, the simple summary is this. Tranche 2 has the strongest public censor material, but it also has some of the strongest warnings about incomplete chain of custody. So we should be interested, but we should not be reckless. And now we come to the most recent release, Tranche 3. And this, for me, is where the archive becomes its most mature. Not necessarily because it has the most dramatic videos, but because it has better assembled case packages, FBI narratives, linked videos, renderings, intelligence community analysis, and the formal AARO update on the Western US event. So the first Tranche 3 video that I want to look at is from the FBI. It is FBI UAP PR-003, Orbs over the pond in 2024. That file number FBI UAP PR-003. Now, this is one of the most interesting civilian origin videos in the archive because it was reportedly captured on an iPhone by a private citizen and later analysed and authenticated by the US government. Now, I'm using the word authenticated there, and we need to be careful with it. Authenticated does not mean confirmed alien. It means that the government considered the footage genuine. Not necessarily that the object in it is exotic, but that the footage has not been tampered with. Now, that in itself still matters. Most civilian UFO videos online have almost no provenance. They're uploaded, compressed, reposted, stripped of metadata, and surrounded by wild claims. But this one appears inside an FBI-linked case family, and that makes it different. The report describes the case as involving orbs over a pond, with the released version cropped for privacy. That means the public version is still incomplete. We do not have the original uncropped device file. We do not have the full metadata. We do not have every interview or investigative note. But it has more official structure around it than the average civilian UAP clip, and that's why it earns its place. It's not visually impossible, it's contextually stronger. And in UAP analysis, context often matters more than drama. The second Tranche 3 video is FBI UAP PR-004, Northeastern Orb Sighting 2025. That file for my second video choice from Tranche 3, FBI UAP PR-004. Now, this one is described as a July 2025 case involving an intense bright light that hovered roughly 25 feet off the ground at a residence in the northeastern United States. So again, if you just say bright light near a house, there are obvious mundane possibilities. A drone, a security light, reflection, lens bloom, aircraft seen from a deceptive angle, even misperception in low light. But the reason it makes my list is that it appears in the same broader FBI orb release context as PR-003. It's not floating around the internet by itself, it's part of a cluster. That does not make it true in the extraordinary sense, but it does make it worth analysing. The key question for a video like PR-004 would be, does the light actually hover relative to fixed foreground objects? Is there parallax? Does the object move independently of the camera? Is there saturation or blooming that makes a small ordinary light look much larger and stranger than it is? Those are the questions I would want answered before making any strong claim. But as part of Tranche 3, PR004 deserves attention because it suggests that the FBI had enough interest in these northeastern orb reports to preserve and release them as part of the PURSUE material. Now, we come to what I think is probably the strongest single public file in the entire PURSUE archive that's been released so far. DOW UAP D077. The title is AARO Unresolved Case Analysis Update Western United States Event. And that reference file again, DOW UAP D077. If you read only one document after this episode, read that one. This is the formal AARO update on the Western US event. It says that over 2 days in October 2023, 6 federal law enforcement special agents reported observing phenomena near a sensitive national security site in the western United States. And again, the key behaviour is that phrase, orbs launching other orbs. The memo describes a repeating pattern in which an orange mother orb appeared to produce clusters of smaller red orbs. Those smaller objects reportedly displayed varied motion, including coordinated horizontal movement and apparent altitude changes. It also notes that at least one red orb was described as stationary above a ridgeline for hours, and that the phenomena were described as silent. Now, that is a remarkable collection of claims. Multiple federal agents, multiple viewing angles, repeated behaviour, a sensitive site, a formal AARO analytical update, and crucially, the case remains unresolved. Now, the memo does not say aliens, it does not say non-human intelligence, it does not say extraterrestrial craft, but it does say that not all of the reported phenomena could be plausibly explained after first stage analysis. That, I think, is a sweet spot for serious UAP discussion. Not wild certainty, not dismissive certainty, but a documented unresolved case with enough structure to demand follow-up. The possible explanations remain important. Flares, drones, pyrotechnics, classified testing, misinterpretation, a combination of events mistaken for one coherent phenomenon, all of that remains possible. But DOW UAP D077 is stronger than most UAP material because it's not just a claim. It is an official analytic document tied to a wider case family that begins in tranche 1 and deepens across the releases. That is why, for me, D077 is the centerpiece of this episode. The final file I want to look at today is FBI UAP D002, titled FD1057 Unresolved UAP Report, Colorado Springs 2022. So that file number again, FBI UAP D002. This is a modern FBI handled case involving a first-hand narrative of UAP activity near Colorado Springs with connections to Cheyenne Mountain. What makes this one especially useful is not that it's the most dramatic case, it is that it appears to be part of a neat bounded package. The witness narrative links to a digital rendering, FBI UAP D003, and to a separate intelligence community analysis, ICA UAP D001. Now that matters. Why does that matter? Well, a witness report is one thing. A witness report that generates a rendering and is then paired with an intelligence analysis is something far more structured. It gives us a case that could, in theory, be audited. You could compare the original narrative with the rendering. You could compare both with the intelligence community analysis. You could ask which details remain consistent across the documents and which details shift. And that's a serious way to examine a case. And that's why I've included FBI UAP D002 in my final selection. Not because it proves anything, none of it proves anything, unfortunately, but because it gives researchers a manageable modern case package to work through. So across all three tranches, where does this leave us? Tranche 1 gives us the foundation. The Western US event begins to emerge publicly with DOW UAP PR049, DOW UAP PR036, and Western US event slide deck, and the USPER statement about UAP sighting. Tranche 2 gives us the strongest sensor material. You've got DOW UAP PR067, the apparent transmedium submarine related case, DOW UAP PR071, the Lake Huron shootdown, and ODNI UAP D001, the senior intelligence official narrative, and DOW UAP D017, the Sandia Base historical pattern file. Tranche 3 gives us the strongest assembled case packages. FBI UAP PR003, Orbs over the pond, FBI UAP PR004, the northeastern orb sighting, DOW UAP D077, the AARO Western US analysis update, and FBI UAP D002, the Colorado Springs FBI case file. And if I had to reduce that whole thing to one conclusion, it would be this: that the PURSUE archive does not publicly prove non-human intelligence, but it does prove that some UAP cases are more serious than the public conversation often allows. There are cases here with multiple witnesses, cases with military censors, cases with senior officials, cases near sensitive sites, cases with historical recurrence, cases where one document leads to another and another and another. That does not give us aliens, but it does give us something worth investigating, and it gives us a much better conversation than the one we usually have, because the lazy believer says, oh, it's definitely aliens, and the lazy skeptic says it's definitely nothing. The files, they say it's unresolved, and unresolved is where the interesting work begins. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these cases do you think is the strongest? Is it PR067, the transmedium submarine case? Is it D077, the AARO analysis of orbs launching other orbs in the Western US? Is it the senior intelligence official narrative from the ODNI? Or do you think the historical Sandia file, the D017, is more important because it shows this pattern has been with us for decades? Leave a comment under this episode on YouTube and start it with question for Stu, or question for Neil, or question for both. Neil will be responding to this episode soon, and I want your questions to shape that follow-up. Challenge us, push back, ask what would convince us, ask what we think is missing, ask what we think should be released next. And if you're listening on audio, please do come over to YouTube and find us at Aliens Explored Podcast. That's where you'll be able to see the videos and file numbers for yourself. Now, if this episode has been useful, please do subscribe to the channel, follow the podcast, hit like, leave a review, and share it with someone who's interested in UFOs but tired of being shouted at by one side or the other. Because this is what Aliens Explored is here for. Not blind belief and not automatic dismissal. The files, the questions, the mystery. I'm Stu Jackson, and this has been Aliens Explored. And tonight, I feel we've done it the right way. Not with noise, but with the files. So until next time, keep watching the skies. Take care.